International Human Rights Law Society. We're so glad you're here. We have with us a very special gentleman who my net is a Dookie. Holds a bachelor's degree from Duke. And I should note that this isn't his only appearance. He's going all over the Duke campus. Tomorrow night he's speaking at the Stanford Institute right across the street, room 004 at 7:30 p.m. So if you want more of Colonel Couch, there's lots more to come. Let's just do a brief round of thanks for DBA and Career Services for giving us very generous support for this lecture. We appreciate that. And now to talk about a gentleman who's here, which sort of straddles the nexus of national security and human rights. Colonel Couch, like I said, is a Duke graduate. Following that, he commissioned as an officer in the Marine Corps. He was a pilot. He later left flying for the law after that, attending Campbell University School of Law right here in North Carolina. Afterwards, he became quickly no stranger to high-profile prosecutions. In 1998, he was on the prosecution team against a flight crew whose Marine jet aircraft clipped the gondola line, killing 20 people. In 2003, he would again engage himself in very high-profile, sensitive litigation. In the case of Mr. Slahi, this is an individual in Guantanamo who was at one time rated the highest value detainee, which seems to be saying a lot. Now, in his investigations for the case, Colonel Couch had reason to suspect and had reason to believe that, in fact, his incriminating statements were obtained by torture, and he refused to participate further in the course of that prosecution. For that noble act, he's received many honors, which I'm not sure he'll tell you about, so I will. The Minister of Justice Award is probably the most notable one. He'll be presented at in just a couple of weeks in D.C. by the American Bar Association, a very prestigious award for a prosecutor that emblemizes prosecutorial ethics. So again, we're very fortunate to have him with us. Please help me welcome Colonel Couch.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate that warm welcome. Well, it's good to be back at Duke. I guess we could all, by the end of this, maybe we could all be standing on the tables and yelling, "Go to hell, Carolina," but at any rate. But thank you very much for having me back at Duke. It's good to be back, and I'm really enjoying my time here. As Brandon said, I've had kind of a varied career. I've been blessed with opportunities to have a few high-profile cases. But I guess I would start off by saying, in any case you're ever going to become involved with, you really need to try to treat it just like it's any other case, and not let the high-profile nature of the case kind of get to your head. And so that's kind of where I started getting myself with the Slahi case. I'm just a trial lawyer. You know, I'm nothing special. I like getting up in front of juries and trying to convince them to do what I want them to do. So my approach with all of these cases that I've had is, what is the common sense approach? John or Jane Q. Public sitting in a jury box, are they going to believe this or not? And so when I embarked on the case involving Mamdouh Slahi and the other cases, incidentally, I was the lead prosecutor for Salim Ahmed Hamdan of Hamdan versus Rumsfeld fame when the Supreme Court ruled on it. Thanks to the Supreme Court, I got a reprieve from military commissions, and that's why I'm now on the Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals. At any rate, with all these cases, I've tried to look at them just as what would be the common sense evidence to present, and that's my approach. That was my approach with the Slahi case. I wanted to know every time this individual had opened his mouth and given a statement that was incriminating. I wanted to know the context of those interrogations. I wanted to know the interrogators that were in the room. I wanted to know, what was going on. And it was not from a perspective, I didn't set out to be a poster child for human rights or anything. I really didn't. I was starting to look at it just as a trial lawyer. And over time, I became concerned that I knew he was one of the two special projects cases. The other special projects case was another case that I was the lead prosecutor for, Mohammed Al-Qahtani, or detainee number 63. You might have heard of him. At any rate, as I started getting this evidence in, and by the way, the intelligence community was not real big about having a lawyer, even if it is a prosecutor, poking around trying to find out about their interrogations. My argument all along was, look, I've got to know it because I got to know where the rocks and shoals are. Does anybody know what that means, rocks and shoals? That's a coastal euphemism for knowing what's underneath the water, so you don't run aground with your ship, and that's I guess a naval term. So being in the Marine Corps, that's kind of how I think of things. But at any rate, I wanted to know where all the rocks and shoals were in my case, and I also had a criminal investigator that was we were of like mind. He believed that the best evidence that you can get out of these detainees is from a rapport building approach of interrogation. That is, you go into the room, you sit down, you have tea with them, and you try to find out who they are, what's going on in their mindset, and establish this relationship so that you can later on have a level of trust that allows you to find out what they know. Now, I've seen, there's one FBI agent in particular that I've seen that did a phenomenal job of that, and he's mentioned in the book, The Looming Tower. His name is Ali Soufan. He's no longer with the Bureau, but Ali is a native Arab speaker, and nobody's better than Ali Soufan. And that's because he doesn't just jump right in with the detainee and immediately start hammering questions. It's that relationship that he establishes. And consequently, the evidence that he was able to bring to the table, specifically in the Hamdan case, is very, very persuasive, extremely persuasive evidence. Now, back to the Slahi case, I've found out that Slahi was one of the 2 special projects interrogations. And so when you hear that term, special projects, you're kind of like, ooh, that doesn't sound good. But I was not able to find out about special projects because they said, look, even though you're a prosecutor, even though you got a top secret security clearance, you don't need to be knowing that kind of information right now. By the way, I should note, and I forgot to say this at the beginning, I do want to make a disclaimer that all my comments are my personal comments and they do not reflect the opinions of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, and nor should they be inferred in any way to determine how myself or another judge on the Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals might rule in a given case. All right. So now that I got that legal stuff out of the way, we're all lawyers or lawyer wannabes in here, right? Okay. Okay. So at any rate, I knew that he was a special projects case, and myself and my criminal investigator, we sort of set out to say, okay, what does that mean? He was very tight-lipped. This was an individual that had lived in Germany for a long period of time. He'd also lived in Canada for a long period of time. He's a native Mauritanian. He was affiliated with Ahmed Rassam. And by the way, nothing I'm telling you right now you can't read in the 9/11 Commission report. He had worshipped at the same mosque in Montreal, Canada as Ahmed Rassam, which some of you may know was the Millennium Bomb Plot leader. So at any rate, he had some places that he'd been and lived, people that he had hung out with that kind of got our attention. And so I believe that was, and this is my assumption, that was why he became a special project. At some point along the line, there was another detainee that was not in the custody of the Department of Defense by the name of Ramzi Binalshibh. Ramzi Binalshibh was basically the right-hand man for the 9/11 attacks. He worked under the direct cognizance of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or we call him KSM, and he was basically the head minion for KSM. Well, Ramzi, in one of his interrogations, had said, well, myself and 3 of the 9/11 attackers, including Muhammad Atta, Marwan al-Shehi, and Ziad Jarrah, we went to training, and the person that helped us get to training was Mamdouh Slahi. So confronted with that, that's when I first had it in my mind, okay, this is not your ordinary breed of cat here. He's got a connection to 9/11, but the concern I had was, okay, can I call Ramzi Binalshibh as a witness? Can I get the statements that Ramzi Binalshibh had to say into evidence? But I've got to look at Ramzi Binalshibh. I don't even know where he's being held. He's not held by the Department of Defense. And so there's a question of the same thing about the statements and what surrounds those statements by Slahi applies exponentially when it comes to Ramzi Binalshibh. So faced with this, I was just kind of, and I had a lot of cases on my plate, so I'm continuing to get the information in. let me give you this as a backdrop. I don't know how many of you have read the Wall Street Journal article. And by the way, that's what started all this off. The chief prosecutor asked me to give an interview to a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, Jess Braven, back in 2006, right after the Hamdan case was decided by the Supreme Court. He asked if I'd give an interview to him because they were trying to do a profile on the prosecutors. Our identities have been held secret up until that point. And my first question was, well, has this been approved by the Secretary, by the Department of Defense? And he says, yeah, it's been approved. And that was the only guidance I got. About an hour into the interview, Jess says, well, I hear a rumor that you refused to prosecute a case. And I said, well, yeah, it's true. And out of that basically came this Wall Street Journal article. It was in the paper last March. But as a result of that is all of this attention on me. And frankly, I really never sought this attention out. All I was just a trial lawyer trying to do his best. So at any rate, with Slahi, I had the information from Ramzi Binalshibh. I had the information that Slahi was giving up. And not too long after that, I came across a document that my agent had found for me that indicated some of what they'd been doing with Slahi. And I'm not going to go all down into all the details, but I will say this. He was subject to long interrogations. He was subject to isolation. Excuse me. And ultimately, they spun a ruse with him that his mother and his brother had been taken into custody in Nouakchott, Mauritania, and that they were going to be brought to Guantanamo. And he was presented with a document on State Department letterhead that said basically, okay, we've got this guy's mother, we're bringing her to Guantanamo, she's going to be the first female detainee at Guantanamo. We're kind of concerned about her safety because of all the other males and male detainees at Guantanamo. And I, maybe I've just got a small strike zone, I don't know, but when I saw that document, after everything else I'd seen, and a lot of it that I'm not able to discuss with you, that's when I finally said, that's it. I've had it. I'm not going to, what's going on here, in my view, was a violation of the UN Torture Convention. The UN Torture Convention has language in there in the definition about mental suffering. And I felt like that he was enduring mental suffering, and the frustration for me was it was at the hands of the United States government. Now, something else you got to know about me to maybe explain why I had this strike zone like I did. When I was a pilot, I went to SERE school. Does anybody here know what SERE school is? SERE is S-E-R-E. It stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. It's basically a school that we have, and the Navy had two schools, one on each coast, where if you're an aircrew, you go learn how to be a POW. It's a week long. You talk a lot about the Geneva Conventions and the protections afforded the Geneva Conventions. We talk a lot about the code of conduct. That is how we're supposed to conduct ourselves if we're taken prisoner. And then we get to have some classroom experience. Basically, they put you out, you get real hungry because you don't eat much for about 4 days. Then you get picked up, and then you're in a mock prisoner of war camp. And then you're interrogated. And you're interrogated with a lot of interesting interrogation techniques. And that's about all I'm going to say about that. The paraphrase Forrest Gump. There's a lot of discussion about this. There's a lot out on the internet. We were told at the time it was classified secret, so I'm not going to be able to go into any of those interrogation techniques. But I will tell you that what I saw was happening with Slahi, at the same time I had in the back of my mind what I'd been through in SERE school. Now, what's the difference between my experience at SERE school and Slahi's experience down there as a detainee? Well, mine was voluntary. They come and they say, all right, Lieutenant Couch, you want to keep flying these airplanes? You get to go to SERE school. The other thing I know is this training is for my own good. I'm being hardened. I'm being mistreated this way for my own good in case I ever fall in the hands of the enemy. Slahi doesn't know that. He doesn't know that at all. I know that it's a week long. I know I've got plane tickets that fly me back to North Carolina on Saturday. So I've got a pretty good idea when this thing's going to be over with. He doesn't know that. So I think there was a big distinction there. I do have a distinction in my mind with SEER techniques being applied to a detainee. They were developed for another purpose. And one of the abiding senses that I had while I was going through SEER school was, thank God I'm an American, because we don't do this. And so that's a concern I had. So I hate to keep flashing back in history with you, but back in October of 2003, I was on my first trip to Guantanamo. I'd just been in the office about 2 months. I went down to Guantanamo to kind of see the lay of the land and figure out, where our office was and so forth. And it's described in the article, in Jess Braven's article. I stumbled upon an interrogation that was going on. I was getting ready to watch an interrogation of another one of my cases, and I heard this loud blaring hard rock music and saw some strobe lights coming out of a door 2 doors down. And I said, what's up with this? And I walked down. Marines are just kind of got this, wow, what's wrong with this? So I go walking down, and I look in this room, and it's dark, and it's got strobe lights going, and there's a detainee chained to the floor, and he's rocking back and forth, and he's praying. And there's this Metallica, type music blaring out of there. And I just said, hey, what the hell's going on here? And these 2 civilian dudes came out, and they pulled the door behind them and asked me, who I was. And I said, well, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Couch, and what's going on down here? And they just said, look, move along. So I said to the guy that was leading me around down there, I said, did you just see that? And he was an Air Force lawyer. I said, did you just see that? And he goes, yeah. I said, you got a problem with that? I do. And he goes, well, it's approved. And so seeing that with the SEER school in the background, and then finally, most importantly, the other thing you got to know about me in my background that'll explain why I did what I did was I'm a Christian. I'm unapologetic. I'm an evangelical Christian. I have voted Republican in every election since I could vote. But that's not, just because I'm a Republican doesn't mean that just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean, i.e., I'm a Republican. Those 2 things, that's a decision on my part. And I think we're losing that right now with what we see in the public debate, is that one's got to be the other, okay? And I refute that. One tenet of the Christian faith is this, is that human beings were created by God, and we have inherent dignity because He created us. God's all about that. And so that is part of the background, that's part of my lens that I'm looking at when I see what's happening with this detainee in Guantanamo. That is, he could be the most despicable human on the face of the planet. Okay? But notwithstanding that, he's got minimum standards of treatment because he is a human being. He's got inherent human dignity. He has the dignity to the point where we don't abuse him. Now, lest you think that I think Slahi is the greatest thing since sliced bread and that I really would like to hang out with him and break bread, the last thing I'll tell you about my history until I start answering some questions would be this. I had a friend of mine in the squadron where I flew as a C-130 pilot, and his name was Mike Horrocks. We called him Rocks. Mike Horrocks, on 9/11, was the co-pilot for the second plane that hit the World Trade Center. He is the only person that I know personally that was in 9/11. When I first started dealing with this FBI agent that I worked with, he was probably one of the most knowledgeable FBI agents on 9/11. The first question I said, it's a personal question, what happened to Rocks? Can you tell me what happened? And he said, we know the least about that flight as all the other ones, but unfortunately I got to tell you, our best idea is he probably had his throat cut with a box cutter and was laying on the floor of the flight deck dead when they went in the World Trade Center. Okay. That goes into my frame of reference when I'm looking at these detainees. And if you take nothing else about my situation, about what I did, which, you know what, a lot of people I'm sure could disagree with me, but it's the best decision I could make with the information I had provided at the time. If you take anything away from my situation, and that's this, all of these things happen to, you have all of these experiences that you bring to any given problem with. But you can never one of them can never be the single factor that you cause it. Not one of those experiences can be the single factor that you base all of your decisions upon. It's a collective effort. And so in my situation, first and foremost, I'm a Christian, and I believe in human dignity. Secondly, I know what it feels like to be abused, albeit for a very brief period of time. 3, I've got a concerted concern as an American to see that justice is done for 9/11. And 4, I've got a friend that's been killed by individuals either like this guy was or friends of his. So it's a combination of things. But you can never let one of those experiences run away with you. You got to look at it as a continuum. And so if you don't listen to anything else I say today, that would be this. I'll tell you, just like I do every jury I've ever argued in front of, don't check your common sense at the door. Take those experiences that you've got with you and apply it to this and filter it through that. And by God's grace, I think you'll make a good decision. So the final chapter on the Slahi, before I take take your questions, would be, I ultimately got down to, okay, I got qualms with prosecuting this individual. What do I do about it? I went to the chief prosecutor. Excuse me. I went to the chief prosecutor at the time. I had been telling him about my concerns. It's all in the article. We had a big blow up about the application of international law. There is an exclusionary provision under the UN Torture Convention that says evidence that's derived by torture will be prohibited from any proceeding brought by the signatory state. And I interpreted that as applicable to military commissions. We had a big disagreement about it. We had a blow up. The question was asking me, why do you think you're better than everybody else around here? And I said, look, I'm not any better than everybody around here. I've just got, this is what my lens is. This is how I'm looking at this case. And I'm trying to give you my best efforts as an attorney, as a prosecutor, as a military officer, Marine Corps officer, and most importantly, as a Christian. We had a difference of opinion, pulled me off the case, and where that case is right now, I don't know. So, having said that, I know I've given you, I'm asking you to drink water from a fire hose by you having to hear that whole story. At this time, I'd like to answer any questions that you might have. Yes, ma'am.
Just to what you just said, that you had a discussion with your supervisor, was his argument that because it's a military tribunal that wouldn't apply?
I never really understood where he was coming from. He was, he had this mantra that international law doesn't apply. And I think we wrote that down in one of the meetings one day. International law does not apply. And, look, I didn't know jack about international law until I got involved in these things. I mean, I didn't take an international law class in college, in law school and stuff. But, I did know enough to know that, on the one hand, we were trying to apply the four-pronged test under Geneva Conventions for unlawful enemy combatants. Okay? We were looking at Nuremberg and the charges under the Nuremberg Charter. That was part of the decision-making process, I think, that went into the crimes and elements that we were applying at the time. And so my thing is, okay, Geneva Conventions, Nuremberg, ICTY and ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal of Yugoslavia, and the counterpart for Rwanda. When you're trying to look at all of those and try to sample and use that law in a prosecution effort, well, guess what? You're bought into international law, whether you like it or not. And it's not like a buffet line. You can't just pick and choose what you want. And that's why, under the UN Torture Convention, being a part of international law, I thought it was applicable. So I really never understood why the chief prosecutor at that time didn't think international law applied. But that was his mantra. It doesn't apply. It doesn't apply. We're looking at the four corners of the President's military order and the Military Commission Instruction number 1, and that's all you got to know. And I disagreed. I ain't the sharpest lawyer in the world, but I felt like there was a little bit more to it than that. Yes, ma'am.
I read a New Yorker article about KSM and the black sites in CIA, and they mentioned that some military personnel were taking out insurance policies for future actions against current interrogators who are doing torture. Were taking out insurance policies. What do you think the liability is for those interrogators right now, or potential liability?
I really don't want to go there. Okay, that's one of those, I really don't want to. That issue is very heavily debated right now. We've got the media is a statute that's now being brought in, especially in terms of contractors. So that's a very delicate issue right now, and I really don't feel comfortable going there. I would say this, just, you know, if it's a service member, they can get all the insurance policies they want, but the bottom line is this: if they belong to the United States military, Department of Defense, a uniformed service member, they are potentially chargeable under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And, you know, we have a joke that goes around, everybody in the military, we are all walking violations of the UCMJ. I mean, I'm sure I break about 3 a day. You can charge anything under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but especially under Article 93, cruelty and maltreatment. You can do Article 128, assault, and assault consummated by a battery and aggravated assault. And I mean, the list is endless. I mean, you can go on up from there. So UCMJ applicability to interrogators, it's out there, and I think some of them have had a concern with that. There's been several books written, and that's really about as far as I'm going to be able to go on that. Yes, ma'am. I'll come back with a follow-up.
With interrogation, do you think that there's any place for techniques designed to disorient or make the interrogatee less than comfortable? And how do you draw the line of when, you know, that rock music is an okay way and when rock music taken to a point or whatever is too far?
That's an excellent question. My position on that is, yeah, I think there are some ways that you can set the stage for an interrogation that are beneficial. And I've debated about receiving that question several times about how I was going to answer it. And the way I see it is this: let's just apply the golden rule. I don't want done to any one of those detainees what I would be offended about if they did it to a lance corporal, a fellow Marine that was one of mine. That's where I come down. Okay. Do they have to have cable TV in their detention holding facility? No. Am I going to expect if one of my lance corporals gets picked up by another signatory nation to the Geneva Conventions, they're going to give him that? No. Can I expect that they're not going to waterboard him? Yes. So that's kind of where I come down to. It's sort of a civil application or a military application of the golden rule. That is, let's treat others as we expect to be treated ourselves. A better poll star, if we would be outraged that an American was treated that way, then that's probably something that we don't want to be doing to a detainee. Now, I am in the distinct minority in that. Okay? I'm in the distinct minority in that, and I know that. But again, you know, I got these old evangelical goggles on, and that's kind of where I see it. A follow-up for you, ma'am?
I just got a follow-up because you mentioned common sense, and I'm wondering, we've talked a bit in our classes about the CSI effect on trial advocacy and law.
Oh, absolutely.
And do you see a correlation to that show with the
24?
Yeah, 24 and the.
Yeah.
I never seen it, but I've read about it.
Yeah, you know what? We my wife and I we watch 24 like every week last year, you know. We did. And after a while I stopped watching. I just can't. You know what? I mean the action's great. The stuff that's going on is kind of outlandish, especially for 1 hour of one day, you know, and all that stuff. You know, but notwithstanding that, at some point, I just can't stand when, okay, you get to that part in the show, we're about 40 minutes in, cue Jack Bauer coming up and sticking a knife in a guy's shoulder, you know, and I just, we got the CSI effect, and I think there was actually some concern was voiced. If I remember right, it was from the State Department. I think actually reached out to the producers for the show and said, "Look, you know, can you guys ease up on the torture thing a little bit, because we're already battling an international public relations nightmare with the treatment of detainees." I come back to what John McCain said. And I'm not trying to politicize it, but the reason I say it's John McCain is he's got a right to say something. You know, he got hung up by parachute corps in Hanoi Hilton for 6 years. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, we can all debate torture all we want to, but this guy knows what he's talking about. And in the debate, floor debate for the Detainee Treatment Act of 2006, what did he say? No, I'm sorry, the detainee, not the DTA of 2005. He said, it's not about them, it's about us. It's not about the detainees. It's not about what they represent. It's not about the despicable, murder or whatever, or an acts of terrorism that they've committed, but it's about us as a nation and what we're going to do about it and how we're going to conduct ourselves. Now, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think this needs to be said. Do I think for a moment that Al-Qaeda or any of the other jihadist organizations that are affiliated with them are ever going to reciprocate? No. The reciprocation argument holds no water with me. And what I mean by the reciprocation argument is if we don't mistreat the detainees that we have at Guantanamo, then when our guys fall in the hands of Al-Qaeda, they're not going to be mistreated. No, they're not going to reciprocate. They're going to cut their heads off. You ought to see these videos, by the way, that Al-Qaeda puts out on the internet. And the ones that have been out there, the Nick Berg video, that's tame. That's tame. You haven't seen the bad ones yet. And I won't even, that's all I'm going to say about that. They will not reciprocate. What we need to be concerned about with, in my view, is, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing what the greatest traditions of this country stand for? I would commend to you, I don't know, has anybody here read, there's a Supreme Court case called Ashcraft versus Tennessee. Ashcraft versus Tennessee, a 1944 Supreme Court case. I'm going to throw that out as a teaser. Go out and look that up when you're doing your free Lexus and Westlaw this afternoon, and take a look at one of the head notes in there and what it has to say about what it expects of the government of the United States in its treatment of detainees and treatment of prisoners. And remember that when it was written in 1944. Things looked pretty bad back in 1944. Perhaps even worse than they look today. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
How do you address, when you're talking about the golden rule aspect, the argument that I hear a lot about people saying that it's different because we're not talking about military fighting military, that these are people who are targeting like civilians and that they need different treatment. I get that a lot from people, that they don't deserve a certain code of military. See
human dignity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm not trying to be flip, but that's where I come down. They can be, they can be the most despicable people on the face of the planet. But we could convict them for what they've done, but they've got inherent human dignity. And I mean that's a tough one. I for one never bought this. We're just going to say omni. You guys aren't getting Geneva Convention protections, because I think the way Geneva, in my understanding of how customary international law works, it has risen to the level that's this baseline of acceptability, at least on the international community, for how we're treating people that have been detained. And then the other thing is the distinction of hors de combat. And I'm not talking about like, battlefield brothel or anything. The term hors de combat, once he's hors de combat, once he's out of the fight, out of the mix, then there's certain levels of treatment that they get, that they're due, notwithstanding what they might have committed on the battlefield. Yes, sir.
I just have a question. You talked a little bit about how seeing things through your lenses. As you've looked at Guantanamo Bay, and you've seen the good that it's done, I guess, it's helped us to find certain things out, saved lives, but also the experiences that you had in seeing the torture victims. Is Guantanamo really a model captivation place, or is it something we should quickly get rid of?
I would say, I'm going to give you a great lawyer answer to that. What's your definition of model? I mean, as far as the facility itself, they're getting better treatment than state facilities that I've been in right here in the state of North Carolina. Okay? I mean, you hear all of this about, their incredible medical care and the food they get and all this kind of stuff. And I know part of that is a PR. I've been there. I've seen it. Yes, it's true. It's true. The treatment that they're getting, where they're housed, and so forth, second to none, in my view. Now, you've got the bigger issue, though, and this gets back to your question: is it the model environment? What's the context of which it has become a detention facility? Okay, and then that's where the law cuts in. You know, the CSRTs, the Combat Status Review Tribunals, are those things valid? You know, the annual review boards, the ARBs, that we review them annually to see if this is a person they're still going to detain. What's the quality of that basically administrative hearing to continue to hold them there? You have those kinds of issues that I think all go into, is it the model facility? I think as far as how they're treated and how they're detained, it is a model facility as far today. I cannot vouch for where it was in 2003. I can vouch for where it was in 2002. Now Major General Mike Leonard was the commanding general for the 1st Joint Task Force for Guantanamo. Sometimes I call him my fairy god general because he's been really good. He's been, you know, I've worked for him, and he is an honest guy, and he's the guy that set up Guantanamo. And I know when he was at the helm, he had an expectation that they were going to be treated. We might not call it Geneva Convention, but we were going to use those as guidelines, and that's how they were going to be treated. I think history is going to show that at some point after he relinquished command and ultimately General Miller got involved, that things changed. So we've got to do something with them. We've got to do something to get them off the battlefield. But I'm not so certain that the way we've gone by it, I think we could have done better. But it's a question that's got to be asked. The other thing is you got to see a lot of hand-wringing about what to do about Guantanamo. We got to stop. we got to start thinking about where we are now and where we want to go, rather than where we wish we were. I mean, we got to address this issue now to sort of see our way forward. And I, for one, would like to see some of the rhetoric, the political rhetoric, the shrill political rhetoric going both ways, has done to the the debate that needs to happen involving Guantanamo. Is there another question back there? Yes, ma'am.
On a previous talk over the summer, one of our professors said that, or voiced his opinion that information that we get by torturing people, basically, it's actually not reliable. So it's not only the means, but that actually in the end it's not even that helpful. And I was wondering, in your experience, whether you agree with that.
Absolutely. They're absolutely correct. And I go back to what I said about the rapport building approach. And a guy like the FBI agent going in and sitting down and breaking bread and having tea. That information is more valuable. There's two quick stories. First, and this goes back from my training at SEER School, they talk about the American aviators that were shot down over North Vietnam and how the unspeakable torture that was committed against them. And I would say this, of everything that I'm aware of at Guantanamo, nothing comes anywhere close to what those gentlemen suffered at the hands of the North Vietnamese. Doesn't come anywhere close to that. They would set a bar, and I've read a lot of accounts, a lot of autobiographies of these gents. Guys like John McCain, Dick Stratton, Jim Stockdale, Everett Alvarez. These guys are just heroes of mine. They would talk about setting a bar that they were not going to give up any information until the pain just got so far they got to that point, to that bar. And only then, only after they had endured a lot of torture, would they then start giving up information. But what kind of information were they giving up? They were giving up, they're asking them their squadron, who was in your squadron. Some of them were giving up, like, the offensive line for the Green Bay Packers. I saw one report, the guy gave up Clark Kent as his squadron commander. One time one of the interrogators was just furious because the guy wouldn't tell him wouldn't tell him where they kept the cows on board a B-52. I mean, stuff like that. So they would come up with a ruse. From what I have seen in some of the reporting, I could see where some of that ruse was going on. I saw some stuff reported by a detainee that I knew, that's bunk. So, again, that calls into question what's the methodology for getting it. The rapport building approach is far and away the best. I had an NCIS, a Naval Criminal Investigative Service agent, a female, and she did the whole rapport building thing. And it wasn't a sexual thing. It was, that thing was not used. It was respect. She would go into the box. It's what we call having an interrogation. She'd go into the box with a detainee. She would bring dates, some tea, fig Newtons, and then she would show some respect. And around about the time on the third or fourth interrogation, she started getting information. She got great stuff. The case that we worked together was the best case that I had from Guantanamo. You wouldn't believe the information this dude gave up. And it was good stuff too. It was corroborated. So I'm a huge fan of the rapport building approach. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering your opinion. Obviously confessions would be lost, but on using the UCMJ to prosecute people as opposed to the NCA.
That's one I'm going to have to steer clear of. There's other judges on my court that are judges on the appellate, on the Court of Military Commissions review. But I would leave you with this. I think there's provisions under the UCMJ, Article 21, I believe it was Article 36, that those rules can be flexible for different considerations. So I think, frankly, military commissions as they're constructed now, since I left the office, since the Military Commissions Act of 2006 came out, they look a lot like court-martial light. And that was one of the things that we kind of threw around. And so then that opens the debate, okay, so what do they do? Are they do a court-martial? Or they do something less? And I for one, I don't think they need to get everything they're entitled to under a court-martial. They're not Americans. I don't think they're due all of the due process rights that we enjoy under the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But I think they at least get the basics for what customary international law says they ought to get. So, let's get some smart folks in there and figure this thing out and come up with something that works. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, you mentioned that sort of your opinion in this area is in the minority in the military. How, after you made this decision and it's been publicized and things, how has that affected, as you've worked with other lawyers and stuff in the military? Has it helped or hurt or neither?
That's a real good question. I think, of the different guys, different folks in the office that I was working with, I think there was a few in the minority that had a contrary view. It felt like that I was going soft or whatever. But frankly, with the majority of them, by the time I left, I was kind of the go-to person in the office because I'd been there so long. I think, frankly, my track record as a career prosecutor up to that point, having done high-profile cases, and sort of the reasonable way I went about it, I had some converts. I had some folks that said, you know what? Yeah, I think you're right about this. And again, there's two ways of looking at it. There's the evangelical in a military uniform kind of approach, which was the bulk of how I was looking at it. But you can make an equally strong argument from just the perspective of just a trial lawyer. What's going to be credible in a court of law? What's going to be or in a military commission? What's going to persuade people that in fact that is what happened? Let me give you this little analogy, and you guys will like this one. I've got a German Shepherd at home, and her name's Reba. All right, I love Reba. Reba's I call her my daughter. I've got two sons, but she's my black and brown daughter, right? Well, imagine. I'm sorry, sir. What's your name?
Troy.
Troy. All right. Well, Troy, imagine you come over to my house, and I say, "Hey, Troy, come here. Check this out. I got some brownies. I just made them myself this afternoon, and you're really gonna like these brownies. All right? They got Ghirardelli chocolate in them. They got the finest ingredients. This is good stuff. But there's one thing I need to tell you before you go commence to eating these brownies, and that is, in the kitchen, Reba had just a little accident, and just a little bit of dog poop got into the batter. Not much, okay. And I've already talked to Reba about it. She swears she's not going to do it again. But, I've baked these things at 350 degrees or whatever it is. Don't worry about getting Ebola or something out of it. And it's got that Ghirardelli chocolate. You're probably not going to taste it, but I need to let you know that before you eat these brownies. Is there any doubt in anybody's mind that Troy's not going to want to eat those brownies? Okay. I use the same application as a trial lawyer perspective to the evidence that's obtained by coercive means. Is there anybody in the world that's going to put any credibility in that? No, not at all. And I don't think we should take for granted that just because a person is in the military, that if they're on a military commission as a panel member or a juror, that they're going to take it either. Yes, sir.
Does your rule for not using alternative interrogation techniques, maybe not in the trial context, but do you think that there's certain extreme circumstances that require that these techniques be used? And how do you respond to the counter argument? And don't quote me on this. I think Giuliani made saying that 20 national terrorism incidents have been avoided using these techniques.
Excellent question. Excellent question. I was posed that I was actually the presenter at the Chicago Bar Association Ethics Conference back in July, and the toughest question I had was somebody that stood up and asked me pretty much that question. That is, what this triggers. Is there a bottle of water or something around here? I'm getting a little thirsty. Thank you, sir. Tell you what, man. Man, if I had 4 Lance Corporals to do that, I'd be all over it. Too bad I can't teach my kids to do that. The ticking time bomb scenario. The ticking time bomb scenario, that's what this one's called. And that is, okay, we're back, Jack Bauer, running across this screen on 24, and he's got the ticking time bomb. There's this nuclear device out there somewhere, and by gosh, we got to find out where it is. So Jack's going to come up and stick a knife in a guy's shoulder joint. All right. Well, 2 issues there. And again, I ain't the smartest guy in the world, but this is how I see it. Number 1, the premise of that scenario suggests that me as the interrogator, I know he knows where the bomb is. And from my understanding and what I've seen with intelligence reporting and stuff, that's not the way intelligence works. Intelligence it's different than, by the way, what they do in the intelligence reports is so different than the way we interview witnesses for a prosecution or a defense. They're looking at trends. They draw conclusions. They make leaps in logic. It's not like they're doing anything wrong. It's just a different way of looking at it. They're looking for trends and things like that. Whereas, think about it, in a courtroom, you ain't looking for that at all. It's the specific, what can I prove? What evidence is out there? What's admissible under the federal rules of evidence or military rule of evidence, whatever. But with the ticking time bomb scenario, the first problem I got with it is that the premise is that I know he knows. Okay, and that, how often does that happen? And that leads me to the second problem I've got with it. The second problem is that is in such a minuscule, the possibility of that premise existing, the possibility, was it they call the, what is it? The law of probabilities, is so minuscule as to be irrelevant, in my view. And so, having said that, having said those two qualms that I've got with it, I'm now going to default over to my position as a Christian. And that is, what if I'm wrong? What if I've screwed up those 2 premises? And then I said, okay, Jack, get in here with your knife and stick this guy in the shoulder and let's get some information. What if I'm wrong on that? Then I have violated the nature of this person, the human dignity he's due. I've often said before, my concern as a prosecutor, and up until the time that I'm now a judge, I've been a prosecutor for all my years as an attorney with the exception of 1, And that is, there's only one thing worse, and you guys can fill in the blank for me. We'll do some audience participation here. There's only one thing worse than a guilty man going free, and that's what? That's right. That's right. Had an interesting case at Camp Lejeune a couple years ago. This Marine was a parachute rigger. His name was Boykins. And Boykins got mad at the other members of his platoon, so he proceeds to go in and he cut 13 parachutes and then repacked them. So then they had a drop 3 days later, and they gave all the chutes out. And in the first pass across the drop zone, 5 dudes jumped out. The only problem was 3 of them had cut parachutes. Now, I've been to jump school, so I know a little bit about that. So they jump out, and they look up, and they got nothing but strings. And they hit their reserves, and all 3 of them survived. Thank God they had, for good Marine Corps training, they hit their reserve chutes and made it to the ground. Well, Boykins, we didn't know who did it. Did the whole big investigation going on, and NCIS got in there, and we had DNA evidence off of the cut chutes. And General Leonard and I are having this discussion, and that's the reason this case is the reason I didn't go to Iraq. I got pulled off the deployment roster for it. Basically, we found a match, a DNA match, to Boykins. Confronted Boykins with it. He confesses, and he says, "This guy Ramirez over here helped me do it." Now, Ramirez, everybody had been looking at Ramirez because he's the biggest liar in the platoon. This guy lies about everything. So he gets hooked up with Boykins. The 2 of them get thrown in the brig, and here I am prosecuting them. Well, it's about the night before the Article 32 hearing, which is like a probable cause hearing. And I'm going through there, and it's actually about 2 days before. I'm putting together all the information about it, and all fingers for Ramirez goes back to Boykins. I'm trying to find the evidence that I can prove that Ramirez did this. And I remember I had it all laid out on the floor of my study at my house. I got up, I went in the bathroom, and I threw up. Because when I started getting underneath the statements that Boykins had made and the other evidence that had been collected in the case, I became convinced that Ramirez was an innocent man. So, to make a long story short, I got the government to agree to pay for an outside polygraph. I went to the attorney for Ramirez and I said, "Tell you what, you get your guy to take that polygraph. The government will pay for it. I'm not going to have him take it with these law enforcement guys. This is a private polygrapher. You get your guy to take that. You need to give me some help to convince the general to get rid of this guy's charges." And I'll never forget it. The polygrapher, this old boy from down here in Smithfield, been doing it 35 years, to come out and say, "That boy's telling the truth." And I went to General Leonard, and General Leonard was like, "Yep, you're right." And that guy got out of the brig. And of everything I did at Camp Lejeune as the chief prosecutor down there for 2 years, including a serial child molester that I put away for 38 years, the moment that I appreciated the most of what I did down there was the day I watched Ramirez get let out of jail. So, back to your question, the whole thing about that, I got a problem with it for fear that I would, that we would torture an innocent person. What if we're wrong? Any other questions?
I think we have time for maybe one more. Okay, well, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel.